Hi guys, welcome to the garden. With us coming to training our fourth and final tier for this Espalier pear tree, I thought it was only fitting to show you the process we used in order to achieve this lovely structure here. So what is an Espalier? An Espalier is a method of training either fruit trees or ornamental trees such there is a central leader with these horizontal branches forming these separate tiers. It is done such that it is grown in a single plane to provide as much space as possible, and it's typically grown against something like a fence, like in this case, or the wall of a house. If you want to see a great example of where this particular training method is showcased, check out the video link in the description. That video there shows an amazing walled garden up in Scotland, a place called Gordon Castle, where they've got hundreds of different varieties of fruit grown in this particular method, or with slight tweaks to it as well. They actually have one of the oldest espaliers I found, which is over 100 years old. So this particular method of fruit tree training I found works best for bearing fruits, so things like pears and apples. So why might we want to espalier our fruit trees? For me personally, the first reason was space. We've got a relatively small garden here, and I do have 2 children, so I want to be able to utilise the space as best as possible, leaving some lawn for the kids to be able to play around still, and to be frank, pack as much fruit in the small space that we have as possible. The second reason, being a kind of bit of a plant nerd, I think it looks pretty cool. Being able to train a branch in such a way that you can show different forms, I just think it's quite fun. And then lastly, fruit. That's what we all want. We want some fruit. This structure here may take a couple of square feet, footage wise, and it's going to be able to harbour at least kind of 5 to 10 fruit, maybe on each of these tiers. So if we have 40 tiers eventually, that could be potentially 40 pears in such a small space. So with that said and done, I'm going to go over exactly the process I used year on year to achieve this Espalier pear tree structure we have today. So, year 1. When you first receive your young fruit trees, they will come as either one of 2 options, as represented by these little cuttings I took earlier this morning. So the first option, option number 1, is something we call a maiden whip. The name comes from the fact that it has a single stem, like a whip, with no lateral branching as of yet. The second option, option number 2, is something we call a feathered maiden. And that is because it already has some lateral branching. So the method for espalier remains the same. However, if you get lucky, some of these lateral branches here, they may be used to skip a year in your training process. So you just end up with your final structure a year earlier. So the first thing you're going to need to do once you've got your fruit trees is plant them. When it comes to planting espalier trees, you want to plant them at least 6 inches, preferably a foot away from your fence or wall that you're planting against. The reason for this means that the trunk, the central leader, has adequate spacing to thicken over the years to provide sufficient space behind it for air circulation to prevent things like disease and fungal buildup. Also, when you plant your fruit trees, be sure that the grafting union, that join between the rootstock and the upper part of the tree, is above the surface of the soil. That ensures that this remains a semi-dwarfing variety. You don't end up with a humongous tree against your fence or your house. In the near future, I will be doing an in-depth guide exactly how I go about planting my fruit trees when it comes to making an apple archway over the fence just behind me. On a side note, if any of you guys know any apple varieties, 2 of them I need, that are sweet tasting and complementary pollinators, please let me know below in the comments. So you've now planted your fruit trees. The first thing you're going to need to do now is decide where you're going to put your first horizontal tier of branching. And to do this, you're going to make a decisive cut. For me, I cut mine approximately 1.5 feet or 18 inches above the surface of the soil to form that first tier. To show you a little bit closer, I'm going to move the camera so you can see exactly what buds you're looking for and how you make that cut. The second thing you need to do is see if you've got 3 appropriate buds that can help form that first tier. For us, luckily, we have this first bud here. That one is the bud that's going to continue to grow upwards and lead on to forming your second tier next year. The next buds this one and this one, fortunately for us, are growing sideways. And that is good because they are going to be trained to form your first set of horizontal branches. So when it comes to making the cut, you want to do this in late winter. For us in the UK, that's around February time. And when you make the cut, you want to do it such that it is an angle sloping away from any of the closest buds. Just gives them a better chance, and so they're less likely to go rotten. So for us, that's sloping away from the camera. So you do this just above that top bud, like so. And hopefully, as spring takes hold, this top bud will grow upwards, these two sideways, and then we'll come to training it. If you have a feathered maiden, you can do a similar strategy, but all you would do is you do this cut higher up the plant and leave any remaining laterals that are in a favourable position lower down, and you'd end up with not only one but two tiers in your first year of growing the plant. So you've removed the apical bud and a few months have passed and your branches have started to grow. By removing the apical bud, you remove something called apical dominance, which means the lateral branches are going to grow a lot more vigorously than if that apical bud still remained on the plant. So a lot of places say, as the branches grow, to tie them into these horizontal wires that I'm shown here. But what I find is, in a windy climate like ours in this location, that it can risk the branch damaging and snapping. So what I tend to do is wait till the branch is slightly lignified in its lower half. What that means is it's become slightly woody. By doing that, you ensure that the branch is less likely to snap, but also at the same time, we don't want to wait too late where the sap is no longer flowing and the plant is in dormancy, because again, it's going to lose its bendability. So the way I do this and attach them is using some rubber coated wiring like so. So prior to attaching these to the horizontal wire, I'll give them a little bend just to make sure they're not going to snap. A bit like stretching a balloon before blowing up to stop it popping. And if I know that it's going to be able to reach the horizontal wire, I'll attach one of these wire pieces just like so. So you're more than likely going to have to use a couple of these just to ensure that the branch does set in the correct angle. So just at the tip here as well, I'm going to add a second one like so. So just whilst I do these, the reason why I like to leave it late as well is it means that the branches are often a little bit more vigorous if they're allowed to grow upwards. And by that, they're going to be slightly larger when they actually come to forming the tier. So again, well, that one's hooked on slightly, but I'll add a wire just in case it comes loose as well. So you'll notice I've left the central leader here. This, if this was representing your first year tier, would then go on to be cut and form your second tier. And you'll notice I've also got this little branch here. For us, this is our fourth and final tier. So I'm actually going to wait, make sure these don't break. And then when it comes to February next year, I'll cut off any remaining branches. And I'll have a lovely 4-tier Espalier pear tree. So year 2. Similar to the first year, you would repeat that exact same process, just cutting again 1.5 feet above the previous tier, selecting 3 buds that you're going to use for the laterals and 1 for the new central leader. Alongside doing this though, you're going to need to address any existing or further growth on your already established horizontal first tier. So you'll notice where this has been tied down. This is the 3rd tier for us, but it will represent the 1st tier for you guys. You'll notice that it has stayed true to its branch angle. But the bits at the end, they've started to grow upwards, as it is in a plant's nature to do so. So because the branch angle has already been established, these are a lot less risky to snap. So you can just simply, without worrying, use again some wire, rubber wire like so, attach it there, and one more at the end here. And then if I'm happy with the desired length of that tier, I can actually cut the remaining tip off, and that again is going to help establish some fruiting spurs on this end of the branch. So you're on to year 3. All you have to do is repeat the exact same process for the previous 2 years until your desired number of tiers is reached. For us, on this fence line, we wanted 4 tiers, and I'll be honest, you can have as many tiers as you want, but it will be limited to the rootstock you use. For us, we have a semi-dwarfing rootstock called Quince A for this pear tree, which means its eventual height can be anywhere between 3 meters to 4 meters tall. So for us, when this is being capped off at 2 meters, then this is going to have enough growth to produce substantial tiers to hold and harbour a good amount of fruit. If, however, you only want a couple of tiers, a dwarf rootstock will be more than sufficient. I would, however, probably not use a non-dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstock for this kind of pear tree, because otherwise you may end up with a root system that for us could go and damage the car park behind this fence, which I think my neighbours wouldn't be too pleased about. So, alongside your yearly process, another important process is pruning. Pruning should be done to achieve what we all want at the end of the day, which is fruit. By pruning some of these water shoots, as they are known, back to the relevant buds, you're going to establish something called a fruiting spur. So I'm going to show you this a little bit closer view, just so you can see and make a reference to what I'm talking about. So this here is a water shoot, an upright vegetative growth that is formed on some second year growth. What you want to do is find the basal cluster of leaves where it joins the horizontal stem, and you want to count roughly 1, 2, 3, or even 4 buds away from the stem. Once you've got to the top, all you need to do, just like previously, is do an angular cut at roughly 45 degrees away from the next bud down. When you make that cut, what it does is it stresses this plant here. That's going to cause this leaf bud, instead of hopefully going on to produce vegetative growth, to form something called a fruiting spur. I'll give you a little example of one I did the previous year. So here's an example of a fruiting spur that is formed with a fruiting bud from a heading cut at the end of last year. So we had here 1, 2, and what was a 3rd leaf bud, which has now changed into a chubby, almost bulbous fruiting bud, which will go on to produce flowers, and that flower eventually will turn into fruit. If we go next to it though, you can see we have a similar branch that was cut back to 3 buds, and unfortunately this has yet to form a fruiting spur. So what you can do is, if you look at the new growth, which is characterized by this little basal cluster of leaves, this little rosette of circular leaves, if you go 1 bud above, so this one here, and make a cut at an angle, then that hopefully will turn into a fruiting bud the following year. So now I've shown you how to make those pruning cuts. I'm going to do a little sped up version of pruning the rest of the plant and showing its final form. And there you have it, all pruned and all ready for fruit spur formation for the following years. And if everything goes to plan and these branches do not snap, we'll remove these top 2 branches here, and that will be our Espalier pear tree complete. I hope you found this video useful, and if you've got any tips or tricks of your own that I haven't mentioned, please feel free to leave them in the comments. All the best.